Eileen. Welcome to NEXWEB podcast.
Hi, nice to be here, Shristi.
Eileen, while I read your book, Daydream Believers, I remembered my early teenage age, playing with siblings, covert agreement with my siblings. I also migrated from one place to another during my school period. I was bullied. I faced racism. I also experienced natural disaster, which is
Mm,
still traumatic for me. Thanks
mm,
for
mm.
writing this book, Eileen. Absolutely loved it.
No, I'm so glad. It's nice to know. When I wrote it, my hopes was that it wouldn't just connect with people who are of my age, but it would connect with a younger generation, and that and maybe would relate to an experience that they had gone through. So it's good to hear that is what's happened in this situation.
What was the main reason for your family to migrate to Australia?
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question because we're not really sure why my father chose to do that. He's a carpenter and he worked outside. So, and it's, he used to get up really early in the morning and he'd never get home till 6, but he'd probably be at work at 7 or something. So, and he always drove for about an hour and a half to and from work every day. And that would have been about 5 or 6 days a week. And I think it was actually his doctor who suggested to him to go to a warmer climate because I think he was struggling with his health then. I'm not quite sure what it was that his health problems were. The only thing I knew was that he had an ulcer. And so that was, I think, was probably the catalyst for him deciding to take us to go to Australia, mainly because it was warmer. And but I think he's never looked back. I think he loved being in Australia. So we migrated from England and then we moved to the boat actually docked in Fremantle, and then we caught a train from Fremantle to South Australia. Then we went to South Australia from there. So in the book, I write about my memories of England itself, just
Yeah.
a little bit about my family. I talk about both my parents, their families. I would mostly spent most of my time around my mum's family, my grandparents. And the hardest thing, it's interesting when we moved to Australia, the first Christmas was the hardest because I remember Christmas being in the cold. Like it was so different to what Christmas was when I was very young. And it was lovely to write that actually. It was lovely to remember walking in the snow and feeling really cold and then going into a warm house. It was just lovely to have that, for that to be still so vivid in my mind, that memory of what that was. But we had great, Christmas is always special in our house, always, even when we moved to Australia, it was always special.
I believe your grandparents, granddad, granny, your other members were in England, isn't it, at that time? Did you miss them during the Christmas period?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, that was the hardest part. That was definitely the hardest part, was not knowing that they weren't going to be there. And also at that time, we just wrote letters. Like people didn't phone and we didn't ring people. You don't ring, we didn't have a phone in our house, or it's just strange to think back then. But the first time I ever had a telephone was when I was 14 and we lived in, Stewart Park. That was in Darwin. So it wasn't like you just go, oh, just give them a call. Like, no, you're not going to do that.
in a book you have mentioned about the power of menstrual blood, and I was so surprised to read that. What's your
Oh,
perspective on menstrual blood?
yeah, so I don't really have a strong perspective on it, but I think the reason I wrote that in that particular chapter is because when Germaine Greer wrote that book, when she first said that, no one talked about the menstrual cycle. That was just, that was so courageous. Like it was kind of a bit mind blowing. And I don't think people really understood initially what she was talking about, but my understanding of it, and that came to me while I was writing, is that at that time there's a lot of myths, right, about menstrual cycle, and most of them aren't very pleasant. Most of them are kind of like, this thing about the menstrual blood is that it's supposed to be awful, that plants die and seeds die, and and women are unholy. You can't go into a church at that time, into a temple. So I think all she was saying was, reclaim it. Like, I think it was a statement on owning your own femininity, owning who you are. Don't let anything else stand in your way. Use the power that it gives you, that men don't have. Use it and know it and own it. And so that was my part of what I was saying in there, was I wanted to own it. I wasn't prepared to let anyone take that away from me. It's power, and I'm going to use it in a way that's right for me. So that was basically mostly what I was focused on in that story.
Like, okay, I'm going to read about the menstrual blood. What are the benefits of menstrual blood? I was just thinking about
Mm.
that while I read your book.
Biologically, being female, and you can reproduce, you can have children. It gives you. It's not what everybody wants, and I recognize it's a choice, but it's a choice we have. We
Yeah,
actually
of
have that
course.
choice
Yeah.
to reproduce. So I think it's about knowing that and just owning it, and that's just and it will come to you at different times, at different stages of your life. I think it will mean something different at different stages of people's lives. I think that's definitely true.
Being a migrant island, you have mentioned in the book that you have faced racism and was bullied in school. Now, while you think you as a child in Australia, how far your mental
Mm.
and emotional health was affected at the time?
So at the time, it was really upsetting. Like, I was 14, you're very insecure about yourself anyway at 14. I think most children are. So it was um, distressing, but see, a part of it was, of course, that this teacher had convinced everyone not to want to have anything to do with me. So he actually convinced them. So I didn't have any friends at school. and and also at that time where we were living, it was a fairly isolated spot anyway, because it was like it was half an hour out from the main town there, 15 k's away. So we didn't go anywhere much really. So it was a new environment for me. Our nearest neighbor was about half an hour away. So it was very lonely and very isolating. But it's like anything challenging that you go through. It's what grows out of that is important. It's that, to me, was what was important. And I mean, I read all the time. I spent all my all my lunch breaks in the library. And what's fascinating is that I read about other cultures. That's what was so amazing, was that it inspired me to understand other people and other cultures and how they live. So all of that came from that. And the other thing that I think too was that, in all honesty, if I hadn't had that experience, then the year after that, when I was in high school, when those girls on the bus were just being so horrible and bullying the kids, I never would have had the courage to stand up and say anything. But because I'd experienced it and knew what that felt like, I wasn't prepared to just turn a blind eye. I had to say something. And they were completely shocked. Like, they just could not believe I would stand up to them. One of the girls was huge. Like, I was the skinniest little kid you could ever imagine. And so physically, I had no physical presence, but I just thought about what I was going to say and just told them exactly what I thought about what they were doing and that it was wrong. And so I never would have done that. So I think you always have to look at what comes out of those experiences that turns you into a much stronger person.
Your dad told that while your teacher asks, don't tell that you are from England, because he knew that you will be bullied
That's
or you will
right.
be face racism at school. But you told that I'm from
Yeah,
England during a school period. Like, how did you get
right.
that courage? Like, you were a child of 7 years child, isn't it? At that time when you first went to school in
Yeah.
Australia,
Yeah,
and
I was, so at the time I got bullied, I was in Darwin, so I would have been about 12 at that time, so I was a bit older. I was in my teenage years. But it's just, I think it was more that I think I was proud of being English. I thought, why should I denounce? That's where I come from. And I didn't come from Ireland. I mean, as much as I respect my dad's heritage, my own heritage, but so I think it was more that I couldn't understand why he was asking me to do that. He'd never asked me to do that before. And I mean, so I didn't know why, but it was interesting afterwards. Then I realized as soon as that teacher started asking me about where I came from when my dad wasn't there, I went, oh, that's why Dad told me not to say that. He knew straight away that guy was prejudiced against the English. So yeah, he sussed it out very, very quickly. I don't know how he did that, but he did suss it out. Yeah.
You were bullied by your surname, isn't it? Your surname Boyle, and you are bullied by
Yes,
your
because
friend.
yes, yes,
Like, what was
yes.
the reason? Like, is there caste reason or reason at that time?
At that time, often they talked about the English as being unclean, so they were
Yeah,
dirty. Like there was
yeah.
this is like every other prejudice. There's no real logical explanation. It's if you want to hate someone, you'll find something. Just keep looking, you'll find something to hold against someone. And so Boyle was just perfect. Like can't get more disgusting than a boil or a So I think it was just it was just convenient for him to use to label me that way. Yeah.
This book really matched my vibe because my surname is Bhattrai Pandey, and I was bullied by
Okay.
telling like my Bhattrai in a different way, and I was bullied by my
Okay.
surname, and this book really matched my vibe. You were also bullied
Oh,
by
how
your
interesting.
surname, yeah, and I was
No,
also
that's
bullied by
right.
my surname, and I also migrated from one place to another, and my father also told me like, don't tell this to these people. You have come from this background,
Oh,
like. And
okay.
I was like, taking my courage, and I still tell like, why shouldn't I tell that? I'm going to tell it, and I secretly used to tell my friends, my teachers that I am from this background, and they
Oh,
used to
okay.
see me in a different way.
But I think also it made me what I recognized more than anything. The thing I learned most about that was that if people want to hold something against you, they will find something, whether it be your race, your color, your religion, they will. They just will look for it, and for whatever reason they can't accept it. That's for them to resolve. You can't resolve it for them, but you don't have to buy into it. You don't have to, you know, that's the great learning, I think, in all of that. Really.
In Australia, you migrated to different places, isn't it? And you went to Darwin, and you had to face a Cyclone Tracy situation. How was that situation, and how it impacted on your lives and your community life at that time?
Yeah, so that's a totally different type of trauma to have to experience. But the one thing about that particular trauma was that you have a community of people who are experiencing this with you. So it's very different to going through something on your own, which is when I was bullied, I felt alone in that. But when Cyclone Tracy, everybody around me was experiencing their own trauma in their own way. And you were watching other people struggle to accept what had happened. And I think there's something about shared trauma that somehow makes it easier to deal with because you've always got someone to talk to and who actually knows what it is you've experienced. And I think that does make a difference. So we didn't have any radio contact initially, and then straight afterwards we did have radio contact. So Stratton, his name was, so he was giving updates all the time about what was going on, and he was advising people to leave. And the reason he was advising people to leave was because there was just so much debris, there was so much damage. They had to basically had to reconstruct Darwin. So, and one of my motivations for putting us down on the list to be taken out of Darwin was I was concerned about my dad because my dad's health wasn't very good at the time. And because that's what they were worried about, people contracting TB, contracting disease. So, and I just remember him saying that was a risk because the water wasn't clean. So it took a while for the water to come through. We didn't have water for a while. So there was a risk of people catching infection. So that was my main motivation. But that basically he just stressed the importance of asking people to leave temporarily. Caught at the flight from Darwin to Sydney. That was the jumbo jet flight, which was the first time we'd ever been on a jumbo. It was like 700 people on that flight. And that was kind of amazing because we knew all these people on the flight. You never get a flight where you would know know these people. And we knew a lot of people on the flight. So that in itself was quite remarkable. So yeah, that was kind of the biggest airlift in the world, I think, at the time. Like, it was really, really sort of renowned for that. Like, it was kind of something that had been very new and hadn't experienced, or Australia definitely hadn't experienced it, and hadn't experienced a disaster like that, that magnitude before. So it was kind of fun, interesting, really, though, because Darwin's a small town. Like, Darwin was a really small town then, and I was very much a small town person. And so it never occurred to me that I didn't even know that other people knew. I mean, I didn't read the paper then. I don't even know if there was one around, but communication had been cut off for a while, because this was only about, I don't know how many days after the cyclone. It was probably only about 6 or 7 days, something. 5 days, I think, after the cyclone, not very long after. So there wasn't a lot of communication going around. So when we arrived in Sydney Airport, there was all these people in Sydney Airport, and it was mind-boggling. Like, I thought, what are these people doing here? And it was quite funny, because I kind of thought, I was so unprepared for it that I honestly thought, oh, they must know. They must be here to greet the people. Like, I thought they must have known people there, but no, they just knew about what had happened to Cyclone Tracy, and so that's why it was just a big headline news in the newspaper. So all these people came to welcome us into Sydney. It was like being a celebrity. It was kind of crazy in a way. It was the most bizarre feeling to walk into it. So, and we were really well looked after. But there was only 4 of us on that flight, though. Back to your question, there was only myself and my 2 younger sisters and my younger brother. So that was the decision my parents made, that I would take them to Sydney. And then my mum and my dad and my 2 other brothers, they drove from Darwin down to South Australia. We had 2 cars. We had a truck and we had another car, my dad's work truck and a car. So they took the cars down. So I had no idea where they were even at that time. We had no idea what was going on with them. So we were I was mainly focusing on just keeping us all together, keeping us all safe. But we were really well looked after. Like, they did a really good job of looking after us through that period.
Did the government look after you for your survival, or like you had to do some job at the time in Sydney?
So we went to Sydney. We only stayed in Sydney overnight, and then the next day we caught a plane back to South Australia, to Elizabeth, which is where I come from, and we had already contacted them. They were so old family friends that we contacted, and they to ask if we could stay with them. And when I got to South Australia, then I rang them and checked with them, and they said, yeah, that's fine for us to stay there. So it was only overnight, and then we went straight from there to South Australia. So trying to find work, because that's where I had to find work, was when I was in South Australia. But because I was 19, so the problem I had was that I was unqualified, so I didn't have any qualification. I did have work experience. I'd worked at a bank and I worked for a doctor, but they didn't want to. I wasn't a junior, so they couldn't pay me junior wages. So if I was 15 or 16, that would have been fine. I could have just easily got a shop job, which I would have been more than happy to do. I just wanted to do something. But I also they didn't want to pay, so they didn't want to pay me adult wages. That was the problem, was that they weren't going to employ me in a shop job and pay me adult wages. But that's what they were that's what they were taught, that's what they were supposed to do. But I even at that stage, I spoke to one of the shopkeepers and he said, I'd like to employ you, but I can't. And I said, I don't care. Just employ me as a junior. I said, I don't really care. I just want a job, did a job. But they were the regulations. I don't know anything about the politics of it at the time. But so that was my dilemma. So that's why I couldn't get a job.
The situation was very difficult. Lack of job, lack of housing, at that time, people struggle a
That's
lot.
everything. So I was second eldest in my family, and I did feel incredibly responsible for my family. I was very worried about what we were going to do, where we were going to live. And even then, I remember going to find out about housing for my parents. Even before they arrived, I went looking into that. So we did get lots of social services. Like we got, there was a place we could go to and find out what was going on, but you still had to suss out what was going on.
Eileen, how did you came with the idea of writing a book about your childhood memories?
I think I always wanted to write it, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I wanted to capture that experience of my life at that stage in my life. It was a way of reconnecting with my family, because after the cyclone, we all went our separate ways. Like we all lived different lives. So it's the last time when we were all living together as a family, as a family unit. And that's a very special time in your life, I think. That's your growing years. That's how you learn to be the person you are, and you learn about life. And I thought I just felt a real need to write that down, to have it written down.
I think you wrote it to heal your own emotions, isn't it?
Yeah, it is cathartic, and it does heal you. But I also wanted it as a record for. I have 2 grandchildren. I have 2 children, and I wanted it for them as well, like for my children and for my grandchildren, to have that. So many times you hear people say, "Oh, I never knew what my grandparents went through. I never knew what their lives were," and so I wanted them to have something written down that they could read and go, "Oh, yeah, that's that. Oh, now I understand." I understand them a bit better. I know something about their life. So yeah, that was also important, I thought.
Eileen, what's your next plan?
So at the moment, I'm still doing some work on the book. So, but this is about distributing and publishing it. So one of the things I wanted to do was do it as an audiobook, but I'm having a lot of difficulty trying to access someone who is able to do it as an audio, because it's just a lot of people who can't read, and I just think it would be nice for it to be accessible to people who could do it as an audio, listen to it. That's what I'm hoping to be able to do.
I hope you will find a person who can do audio to your book. And then how can people connect with you, and how can people buy your book, Daydream Believers?
Okay, so you can do it through Amazon, but it's also it's on sale at the Book Cow in Kingston.
Okay.
So people can get it through there. But if they want to get it, I do have some copies on me, because I can actually sell it. So it's $28 on Amazon, and it's $28 on at Kingston, and I'm more than happy for people, if they live in that area, to go there. But I do have some copies on me at home at the moment. If people are interested, they could send me an email, or probably just send me an email, I guess, if they want it.
Okay. Can they get your email directly on your website, or?
I don't know. I don't have my details on our website, so I don't know how you.
We'll put your details on the website, and people can
Yeah,
directly contact you to
that's
buy
right.
the book. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I think that if you do it through you guys, that'd be great. That people can certainly get it that way. Yeah, but I do have, as I said, plenty of copies here.
Definitely, we'll keep your details, your email on our NEXWEB website. It was great talking with you, Eileen. Thank you
Yeah,
so
you
much for
too.
your time, and thank you
No
so
worries.
much for writing this book. It reminded me for the flashback of my early teenagers. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Eileen. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.